All right, we're dancing. Let's go.
Welcome back to the Winner Circle, everybody. I'm super excited to be here again with another amazing guest. The goal for this podcast is for bringing you guys people who are going for their win in the real world. And what that looks like is following their bliss, answering their calling, and just living a life that they're completely in love with. And I think it's so awesome that we are able to conversate with people who are doing this, because a lot of people in the world are doing jobs that they think they have to do or they think they should do. And that's not necessarily true just to survive. You can do what you love and provide your gifts to the world and monetize that if you work at it. So if Derek would please introduce our guest for this week.
Absolutely. I can't wait to introduce this week's guest. He's a mentor of mine, someone I really looked up to. I met him in Austin, Texas at the Onnit gym, where he is the director of fitness education for the Onnit Academy. He is a master of so many unconventional tools, specializing in the steel clubs. He was the former founder and creator of Dare to Evolve, a part of Clubbell Evolution, from the Northwest Territories, now living in Austin, Texas, with his beautiful family. Ladies and gentlemen, Taiha, Shane Heins. Welcome, Shane.
Thank you very much. Really great to be here, Derek.
Excellent. Well, we're just going to dive right into it. And I feel this is a very important question for everyone to be aware of. And if you don't know what yours is, the audience, there's never a better time to start anything than right here, right now. So the question to get it all kicked off is, Shane Heins, what is your mission here on Earth? What is your purpose in this reality plane that we are occupying together?
What I have found my purpose and my mission, the meaning of my life to be about, is about being of service, but being of service specifically around helping everybody elevate to the highest expression of themselves. I think one of the things that I have grown up in my life, thinking about a perspective of how I look at the world, is in fact one of the pillar principles of the Onnit education fitness system, unity and diversity. And this idea that we can all be unified, not in conformity or sameness, and at the same time not be all so different that it's a chaotic mumbo jumbo that doesn't really go anywhere, but rather this idea of bringing the two together, really looking at the diversity, the beautiful gifts that everybody brings from themselves, from their life experiences, from who they are, from their interactions with others, and their life's journey, and being able to put that forward, the diversity of that, and recognizing the sameness in our journeys. I think it's so interesting. One of the things that the two of you have been talking about is this idea of the hero's journey and the challenges that we all go through as we go along. And what's so interesting about that is that I know I have felt this, and in talking with many others as well, it is so easy to feel like we're the only ones going through it. Like we're alone in this somehow, and yet we're all traveling that journey, but the expression of those may all have a slight tweak, just a slight difference, that being able to recognize the sameness or the commonalities in those journeys helps unify and bring together all of those amazing diverse perspectives in order to have a bigger sense of the whole picture, because we're all part of the piece of a picture. None of us has the whole picture. If we had the whole picture, we wouldn't need each other. And I think as we've seen just in humanity in general, that we are not meant to be apart. We are meant to be together. And so having that perspective of unity and diversity, that has been a major driver for me for my whole life. In everything that I've ever done has always been about how do I support? How do I encourage? How do I inspire? How do I educate? How do I contribute to the lives of everybody else? And bringing whatever gifts or insights I may have found along the way, but as a means to help each and every individual bring out their expression. Because I can't tell you what your greatest gifts are. In the end, all of us outside can help draw it out from each other, but in the end, it all comes down to our being able to believe that and to express it, to bring it forth. So it's really been about empowerment and just being so excited. And that excites me. I think, Ty, how you mentioned earlier, talking about the idea of finding bliss and joy in your work, in what you do. And for me, definitely one of my absolute greatest joys is seeing that spark light up in people that I get to interact with.
So beautiful. I love that so much. I think especially in these times when there is so much division and the opposite of what, we hope to be living in, it's such an interesting concept because a lot of the time you don't really hear those two words together. Like they sound a little bit opposite, right? Unity and diversity, difference, similarities. But we all, as you were saying, like, if we all had the answers, we wouldn't need each other. We could live in the forest alone forever. But it's so important that we have that connection, yet that diversity, the similarities where we can understand somebody's point of view. We can see life through their lens because we have a different lens than everybody else. And our lens, obviously you can like work at broadening it, but I would say most of the time we can't see everything, right? And learning how to understand or do your best to understand those different views and allow whatever rings true to you to be brought into your awareness and include that kind of person or their view in your life, even if you're not necessarily experiencing that, is where we feel like, we all come from the same source. We are all human beings, and we've been taught this separation, right? And this division, diversity versus division. It's similar word, but very different. And learning how to remember where we came from and that we literally all came from the exact same thing. And we're just experiencing this thing called life differently, but it doesn't mean that we, one view is right, one view is wrong. Like there's so much right, wrong. You should do this, you shouldn't do that. And it's like, that's also just stuff that we make up in our heads. So I think that was so awesome. And being able to empower somebody in seeing their gifts, because as you said, I think it's so true. Like you can't tell somebody what they are capable of. They have to experience that. You can help them as much as you can, but they have to be able to find that and believe in themselves before they can really do anything with it. So it's different than, telling or teaching somebody what, like, I feel like it's the difference of reading from a book versus experiencing, right? You want to help aid them in experiencing their own gifts for the world so that they can provide what they can for humanity, because we all have this amazing gift. And I think we all desire to serve each other. That's another reason that, we would be living alone if that wasn't a thing that we wanted to do. And helping people rediscover that within themselves and release all of the, no, I should be doing this. I should be in this corporate job because my mom said this or whatever it is. I think that was really awesome.
So Taiha and I met in Aubrey Marcus's Go For Your Win course, where my biggest takeaway is it's the process that is the win. And we live in a society that is so destination orientated. When you get this degree, when you get this job, when you get this relationship, when you get this whatever. But really the sweetness is the journey there, the process. And that's something we often forget. What does Go For Your Win mean to you, Shane? And what does living your win look like for you today?
That's a great question. I think to go for your win, the two questions, it was go for your win and then living your win, right?
Yeah. What does go for your win? Like, what does that mean, winning for you? And how are you winning with your life today? Like, what do you do to fulfill your mission that we talked about? Like, what does your day look like?
Yeah, I think go for your win for me is about continuing to strive to find your highest purpose in life. So in the beginning of this conversation, we talked about this idea of expression and everybody having a slightly different expression than each other to help paint the whole picture. And so to go for your win for me is about going towards that, putting in the daily work and putting in the effort that it takes in that discovery. And I think that that is often not valued enough. It's not thought of as an energetic cost. It's not thought of as an effort. It's not thought of as, because so much of that, and I think it expresses itself in different ways, but so much of that revolves around introspection. So being able to take time away for yourself to reflect. And sometimes that reflection could be an entire day being out in the mountains. So here's a very specific example of what that is for me is, and my wife has always said this, is when I get out in the wilderness and I get out in nature and I can just walk and I can just be out there, that's when I get my most prolific insights. That's when I get the space to really reflect on what am I working on now? What can I do better? What's coming next? And so sometimes it's expressed that way, but there are other times where it's also in the moments. So we're in our work day, our daily work life, and we're moving through and there's conversations and there's meetings and there's tasks to get done. And while you're going through that, it is so easy to get caught up in whatever we're doing to the expense of paying attention, to the expense of maintaining awareness around how am I as a human being enacting right now as I interact with other people, as I do my work. Am I being as sincere in my work as I can be? Am I really as focused as I can be? Or am I sort of putting up a front that's making it look like, oh yeah, look, I'm really busy, but I'm not actually really connected to the self-awareness that it takes for that growth to continue to move one layer at a time, deeper and deeper. And so in Go For Your Win, for me, it's, I think really the big element is how conscientious and how aware am I being in day to day, hour to hour, moment to moment. And I think in many ways, for me, it actually, that's part of where whatever struggle I feel in my life, that's where that comes from. And so I have so many things that I am grateful for, so many things that I'm just absolutely blessed to have in my life and that I'm joyful about. But I have to admit, I don't live every day and every moment, I'm still figuring that out, I guess, where I feel like, I'm on cloud nine, everything's just amazing, this is, and that's how my life goes. Actually, most days I feel a struggle. I feel like I haven't found my win. I feel like I'm going for my win, but it's not necessarily like, oh, and now I've crossed the finish line and I've won. And that, I think, really ties back to, but it's not a bad struggle. It's a good struggle, because that's me going for the win. That's me striving to have the level of conscientiousness and awareness that I feel we all have the capacity for, and that is almost a personal responsibility for me to strive for if I'm going to reach as far as I can get my capacity. And if I'm not striving for that, how am I supposed to empower anybody else to also be able to go for that as well, if I'm not every day working on that myself? So I would say that's what go for your win is for me. And then in terms of how am I winning day to day? Partly, I think in large part is being in this process. I think the opportunity to connect with people, tying it back, there's this duality of a very personal process, but at the exact same time, it happening together. All of us going through a very personal process, but all together, and needing that interaction to feed the personal process. And so for me, big things that are wins are the opportunities to connect with people meaningfully each and every day, like I'm getting to do with you guys right now. This is beautiful. This is a big win for me right now. And another big win is being able to connect with my family, because for me, I have 3 kids and happily married, and that for me is a win, to be able to have that and to be able to strive for that, and for my wife and I to strive in our marriage to be the type of example that we want to be for our kids, as a way of helping lay out a potential map for them as they grow into adulthood, and find and connect in their relationships. Because as this theme seems to be continuing to go today in this conversation, it's these relationships are so important. Whether it's an intimate relationship or a relationship like this as friends, and relationships with strangers, and how we interact with our fellow human beings. And so that's a big win for me, being able to have that. And I'd have to say that right now, with a lot more opportunity to be working from home, and I'm thankful to be able to continue working and doing so from home, I have had much more opportunity and connection face to face and with touch with my family day to day, and that has been a huge win for me. And so so that's a big one. And another one is being able to access physical well-being. And that for me personally, I know it's different for people. Some people are real movers, and some people it's more of a struggle to move. But I think there's this misconception that movers have it easy, because when it comes to having a regular fitness routine or exercise or taking care of their physical well-being, it's like, well, you like to move. I don't like to move, so it's a struggle for me. Like, actually, that's not true. I'm a mover in many ways, so I need to move. And I believe we all need to move. But for anyone who is just naturally driven physically that way, I still have to work very hard to take time for myself to exercise, to work out, to train, to move, to breathe, because I have this other really strong pull, and that's to do the work to be of service to everybody else. Mm-hmm. And so those two things compete. And that has been a lifelong journey for me, to make sure that I continue to move and take care of the physical vessel that will allow me to continue being of service with more energy for a longer period, like for a longer time in my life. And so when I can get that in, and if I can get it in every day, that to me is a win. Another win is taking time for myself, just personally. I tend not to, if I look back, traditionally, I don't take enough time for myself. I tend to be a giver. I give and I give and I give and I give. And so that, as I have reached, we didn't need to say this, but as I reach the age of 40, I feel like I'm still 20 years old. So it's sometimes weird saying that. I'm like, okay, I guess I'm getting to the old man line. But as I reach 40 and I think about 40 years of probably 20 years, a solid 20 years of really being in a space where I'm constantly giving to others and having to create space for myself, the last few years it has taken greater and greater priority. And I'm still not great at it, but working on it. And so that, when I can create that space for myself, is another win. There's a few. I could probably find more wins, but those I think are bigger than standing right now.
That was incredible. And I already know that this is going to be one of my favorite conversations. It's so funny how literally each of these podcasts that we do, it's like exactly the conversation that I need right now. It's so funny. And I just related to so much of what you said. I literally just got back from a 3-day spontaneous solo road trip to Yosemite, my favorite place in the world. I grew up going there since I was 3, and I originally was going to try to meet some friends, but that didn't work out. I was like, oh, this is probably the universe telling me that it's time to try this by myself. And it was the exactly what I needed. When you are just walking up in the high Sierras where there was literally nobody around, I was honestly like, this is kind of scary. I'm all by myself up here. But quickly I was just like, wow, I'm so proud that I can be here right now and taking this time to really find out more of who I am. Because when you're with your friends or there's just so many distractions that prevent you from actually being with your mind. And that's just so it's like we work out our bodies our whole lives, and we've been told how much it's important to do that, yet we weren't really ever taught that we need to do that with our mind too. And meditation, being in nature, all of these tools that we have to really dive deep into what's going on in there, and figuring out what are things that we have just taken on, beliefs, stories, all of this that may not be actually true to who we are. And I think the tools that we have are so important, yet a lot of people aren't exposed to them. I mean, I think we should be meditating in kindergarten and then doing it for the rest of our lives. Like, as you said, you've been practicing that self-awareness in your everyday life. And it's something that we have just been, as humans, we live in the future or the past and almost never the present. And, you're worried about, gotta do all these things at work or, why did I say that, or whatever it is. And that awareness is like a muscle that you build, just like we build our muscles in our bodies. And I think it just takes that practice and consistency. I used to coach corrective exercise, and something that I would always tell people was, we're unlearning habits, right? You have to first catch it, which is the awareness, and then correct it. Catch and correct it. And that's all that you can do. You can't change the past. So this current muscle of awareness that you currently have is just what's there. You just kind of got to accept it and then work towards improving it 1% better every single day. And you said something interesting about, you're going for your win, is that kind of journey where you're not quite there in the awareness every single day, but all that, the whole experience is the win, right? It's not just when I am finally aware in every single moment, I'm going to be at my win. It's like, no, the whole time we're never, first of all, going to get there. Like there's no end. Everybody always thinks that there's an end.
Yeah.
It's a cliche, but it's not about the destination. It's about the journey. And it's funny how, you know, we can be just focused again on that future someday, one day. And it's like, no, the only thing that we have is this moment right now. Am I doing what I can to get to where I want to be? Yes. So in my opinion, you're winning right now, currently, and you're just going to keep getting better and better. And I think that's what I think we just need to practice a lot more compassion for ourselves, because again, what we brought up to think is that, you know, something about what we currently are doing is wrong or needs to change or needs to improve. And I think we can always improve, but practicing total acceptance and compassion and love for the current person that we are in this moment is so important. And in my journey, at least, I was so worried about like getting somewhere. And I'm like, if I'm so worried on getting somewhere, I'm never going to be where I am, which is just sad, because at any moment, who knows what's going to happen? All this stuff that happened in the past 6 months, like, who knows what's going to happen in the future, right? Like we gotta just be so like accepting of our current moment while working to improve. And then you're just doing the best that you can. You can't ask yourself to do any more than your best, right?
Well, and I think this ties in really nicely to where we started off in that idea of unity and diversity, because what you had mentioned, this idea of division, and the division that is especially highlighted right now in this time, that it's very, very, it's not that it wasn't there before, but it's at the surface of at the forefront of everyone's awareness right now, to a degree that it hadn't been before. And that to be able to bridge those differences is to be able to see from each other's perspectives, and to not only see from each other's perspectives, but to actually respect and value each other's perspectives. And in many ways, that is being able to have compassion and sympathy and empathy, to whatever degree we have, for that position that person is in, for whatever place that person is coming from. And in order to practice that, if we were practicing like a muscle, it needs to be trained, that we may not necessarily we will never have as many reps with other people as we have the opportunity to have with ourselves. Mm-hmm. And that to be able to have that compassion, and to be able to have that, the idea of being able to see from another perspective, is actually being able to have that compassion for ourselves. If we think we're hard on other people, more often than not, the root of that is coming from because we're being really hard on ourselves. Mm-hmm. Whether it's being really hard on ourselves in light of, I'm not doing enough, I'm a piece of crap, what do I have to give? Or being hard on ourselves, like, okay, this isn't enough, I can do the next thing. All right, let me, and whatever direction that struggle is coming from, that actually, like what you just said, being able to have compassion for ourselves and where we're at, and that to recognize that we are enough, and that it's okay if we have failed, or it's okay if we've been wrong. That perspective, that practice with ourselves every single moment throughout our day, throughout our lives, is the same practice that we can have with others. And I love where this conversation is going, because it's so cool to have these the interweaving dualities of it's all together. And anybody listening, and we've all found ourselves in that space when we're reading something or we're listening to something, we go, yeah, it's all about together. And then we're so together all the time that we end up getting pulled a little out of balance. We go, okay, I need some time to myself. I also need personal reflection. Great. It's all about me. It's all about I have to do for me. When the reality is, it's actually both happening, interweaving at the same time. And I think that's part of the challenge that many of us find ourselves struggling with. Well, which one is it? Because it's easier to have, just give me A or B, give me black or white, give me right or wrong. It's like, well, it's not. It's both. And you got to keep working at finding the weave so that it's, rather than, this big arduous process to swing back and forth and try and get to middle, is just continuing to work to make it where it's a lot closer to center, and we find ourselves being able to fluidly move from one to the other. I need glow sticks right now.
Wow. Yeah. That was a very hit home statement that you just said, where, I think a lot of people deal with this intense black and white, all or nothing, and learning to find that perfect balance of, pushing yourself, but practicing knowing that you are enough, no matter your material possessions, no matter the company you started, whatever, all of that could just go away in any moment. And you got to know that just you being you existing is enough in itself, while you are practicing improving, practicing creating what you can for the world, while you are taking the time to be with yourself, and then also interacting with people so that you can learn from them. Life is so challenging and so beautiful, and I'm so excited to be here on this earth experiencing all of this with you guys, because shit's crazy. It's incredible, like how much, when you really look at it from that bigger picture, because I think, as we said, like most of the time people are going through life with these blinders on, as in like, this is the only way. And there's just so much out there. And through this connection with each other and spending the time with ourselves, can we finally start to see what's actually going on here?
Yeah, absolutely.
Learning a balance between being and doing, with a steady sense of stillness all throughout. That's what I'm aiming for. Let's celebrate a bit, Shane. You've accomplished a lot in your 40 years. Let's celebrate a few of your biggest accomplishments, and why are you most proud of these accomplishments? And these could be personal, professional, whichever you want. This is your time to celebrate.
Woo. That's a good question. I think this has been a wonderful conversation so far, because it's given me the opportunity to think about, even thinking about the Go for Your Win. I was like, man, I have a lot of wins. Man, I have a lot of like big things that I've accomplished in my life. And I think it is such an incredible opportunity to be able to reflect on that. And I love that you use the word celebrate specifically, because this is something, I think we've spoken a little bit about this. I know I've spoken with others about it, that I really encourage everyone to do, because it's something that I know I'm working on, and I don't celebrate enough. Usually when we get to, the finish line of whatever task we're on, we're like, all right, we just put in this massive effort, all this energy, no sleep, didn't eat, didn't get our movement practice, but we got to this point. And at this point, what was the whole point? Well, it was to be of service. It was to help empower other people. It was able to, do all these things that are driving what our lives are about. And then I get to that moment, and every time I get to that moment, I'm like, all right, great. What's next? And that can get wearing over time if I don't take the moments for celebration. And so I think in that, I just want to say thank you for this opportunity to celebrate a little bit, because I don't do it enough. And I recognize that to be able to continue to have energy and joy around what I'm doing, I have to remember why I'm doing it and be able to celebrate the milestones. I think I'm going to hit three things along my life that I think I would like to celebrate, or that I know I want to celebrate. And one is that I was given the incredible gift of growing up in the Arctic amongst a people who were not my own. And that for me has been such a foundation for my whole life. Like in more and more in recent years, I've always been thankful for it, but more and more I've been calling that to mind more often and just going, man, whatever your greater spiritual beliefs may be, for me, it's like, thank you, God, for giving me that, because it helped me to face trying times and challenges throughout the second half of my life that in many ways could have been or felt a lot harder than they do. But it's because of what I went through when I was a kid. And the Arctic is an unforgiving environment. It is cold. It is barren. We were just talking before this conversation started, in the summertime, you think, oh, you get a little break. There are bugs, there are mosquitoes and black flies and horse flies. It's insane. People would ask, so do you like camping in the summertime or in the wintertime? Wintertime, hands down. It's cold, but there's no bugs. And so, like, as an unforgiving environment, it can seem really stark and it can seem harsh. And in the environment that I grew up in, the community, I grew up in a First Nations community, a Native Indian community, and one of the very few white people there. And through that, there were many challenges because the color of my skin represented a peoples that had heaped great injustice on the peoples of the community that I lived in. And so in so many ways, I got to face racism. I got to face prejudice. I got to face just massive deconstruction, constantly being put down, mentally, emotionally, physically. I went out every day, out my door, half expecting to get into a fight, simply for survival, simply because of the color of my skin, facing getting beaten with sticks, getting choked out to unconsciousness, facing firing lines of rocks. Like, all these things I could look at and go, that was terrible, and I could be angry and I could be resentful. And yet, just like the natural environment that was there, this interaction was giving me an opportunity to face, in the midst of that intense experience, it was the opportunity to see from another's perspective, even while I was under fire. And I think this comes back to what we were talking about of how do we see from each other's perspectives? How do we celebrate each other's strengths? How do we find the commonalities rather than focus on the differences and keep us divided in that way? And so while under fire, which should have felt very personal, I was able to work through a process with the support of my parents and the support of my faith and just whatever it was I was given to be able to face that scenario, to be able to then see from another perspective. Because even as a kid, I recognized that it wasn't simply a personal attack. It was an energy of generations of anger and resentment, of things that had been done to them. And even as I went through that, even though it was hard, I still recognized that, well, I get to go out and face this crazy life, this crazy experience. But at the end of every day, I actually get to go home to a home that's safe and is supportive. And the people of that community, facing the various challenges that they were facing as a community and within the families, And this isn't to demean or make any kind of association with, but there was prevalence of alcohol and drug use and abuse, and these ramifications of things that had been a part of the experience that they had faced from the people of my skin color previously. And during that time, how people would look down on the Native people. And so I knew I was going back, and I knew that they weren't necessarily having that same kind of environment. And so in that way, the opportunity to have faced that and to be in the midst of it, having it directed at me, and yet being able to see the other side, and to be able to see the other perspective, and to have compassion for that, to have compassion for those individuals. And because at the same time, going through that harsh environment of the Arctic actually ended up being a part of my salvation. Because whenever I was having a really hard time with whatever it was I was facing, interacting with people, I could go out. In our town, it took you 10 minutes to walk across, 750 people, fly in, fly out, the middle of nowhere. I walk and I'm out within 15 minutes, I'm in the middle of nothing. Wow. And yet in the middle of everything. And that, I think, is why that has carried over into my adult life as the space where I go and I reflect and I connect, because that's the gift that was given to me as a child, that when I face those challenges, that I'm allowed to do that. I have that space to be able to find that. And at the same time, within the community, I had also been exposed to incredible generosity and incredible, like, there's way less about what's mine and what's yours. Part of the First Nations culture, the Native Indian culture, is a much more communal ownership. This idea of everybody just sharing what you have. And so this incredible generosity. I was given the gift of humor. The humor, and I have so much fun joking around and having laughs with everybody. Humor has continued to be a part of my life, but there is something so unique about the humor of the Native Indian community. And I think part of it is having to have found the humor amidst the struggles and the history that they have had to go through, and to still find that humor. And what an incredible gift. And when I get around my friends, like within the Native Indian community, I find myself laughing so hard, laughing like I haven't in a long time. And I think that was another one of those incredible gifts. And thirdly, another gift that they gave was the power of the drum and the power of the song. And there were community drum dances that would happen. And no matter what we faced on the day-to-day basis, and the struggle of the interactions and the differences and trying to find that common ground, whenever there was a drum dance, the whole community came together and we were there, and there was acceptance, and it didn't matter. And I remember being so taken by the power of the drum and being able to dance. It was such a deep connection that it elevated my spirit. It elevated my soul, and in a way that I have found difficult to find in other things. And that was a gift that they gave me, to give me for the rest of my life, that if I ever need to find that elevation or that connection, I can connect to that. And so while I paint a picture of it having been hard, at the same time, we came to a place of acceptance within the community. It took years, but it was a process. It was an experience, and to be able to be considered as one of the community. And when I got to that stage, when I would see, friends and they'd be like, so or people from the community became further and further becoming my friends. They'd be like, so when are you coming home? Like the first time I heard that, because it was always about, when are you leaving? Get out, and all we were there for was to connect with people. And so so that for me is a celebration, to have been able to have that experience and to be able to have come through it with the lessons learned, with compassion, forgiveness, and love in my heart, rather than what it could have become, which is a continuation of anger and resentment and frustration and whatnot around those things. So that is one big celebration. The next big celebration I'd like to highlight is my family, and having found or having my path put on the path of my wife's and hers on mine, and having our paths come together is one of the greatest joys, one of the greatest blessings of my entire life. And I wake up every day being so grateful and so thankful that our paths were brought together. And funny to tie back to, together, alone, and finding that really, in being able to find that connection for both of us, came out of having each been in relationships that didn't work out, each being in relationships that had, just a lot of stuff that was making it difficult to mesh and difficult to move forward. And so we had both moved into a space of just focusing on ourselves, in the sense that, well, if I'm going to be better prepared for a relationship with another, I need to bring my best self. And we were both in that space. And by being in that space, it allowed us to find each other, to not even just find each other, but recognize each other when our paths got put, right next alongside. And so that has created a foundation for us to have mutual respect, mutual love, a space of consultation. Doesn't mean it hasn't had its challenges. And I do have people are like, man, you and Juliet, so great. Like, it just seems like nothing ever goes wrong. No, just like every other relationship, we have our challenges. But the place that we come from, and a place of, again, that respect and trust, it's so hard to get into such an intimate space to connect with each other if you don't trust each other. And, and the love, like, there is deep, deep love. And yet it's not just love that gets us through. It's this sense of trust and purpose and love. It's like love gets to wrap all of that. And those things are the core that allow us to keep loving each other and finding the space to love each other. And I tell her all the time, like every time our wedding anniversary comes around, like, honest to God, straight up, no word of a lie, I fall in love with you more and more every single year. Like, I can't imagine loving her anymore, and yet I do. And so being able to have that space together and to raise a family together in that space. Shane, you and Juliet, you're such great parents, and they're so lucky as kids. And just like every other parent, we have our challenges, but we have this space that we can work on it together. And I am so blessed to be the father of these kids, and I want to celebrate them, my marriage to Juliet, and to celebrate my kids, because that is going to be one of the greatest services that I can ever provide in my life, that they then in turn move the next generation and are a part of that. The things we're seeing in the world, if we can contribute to every generation together, moving the ball forward, then I'm super thankful for that. So I want to celebrate that. And And then lastly, I want to celebrate the opportunity that for the connections that I have been able to make through my work. My work has and always will be driven by my sense of purpose in my life. And where I end up, I don't necessarily have, like, I have a big vision and there's lots of things, but I don't have this like one thing that I'm just, this is what I am creating. This is what I'm doing in my life. So much of that for me has been a journey of discovery. It's been a process. So for everybody at home who's listening to this, if you guys feel like you don't have it figured out, high fives. Just celebrate that for a minute. Exactly. Because the sooner we can all embrace that and accept that, the sooner we can get on with it. And so for me, that has been a big celebration, in that as I have moved through my work has continued to unfold before me, has continued to unveil, driven by the purpose of my life. But the expression it takes continues to unfold and unveil. And along the way, I have met such incredible people, just absolutely amazing. And to have been able to connect with each and every one of them, to have, if I have in some small way, contribute to their journeys, that is something I'm super grateful for. And I want to take a moment to celebrate that I get to do that and that I get to have that. And Derek, you are one of those people.
Thank you.
And Taiha, I'm super stoked that we have gotten to connect, and hopefully we'll continue to along the way. So those are my big 3 celebrations. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Wow.
That's beautiful.
Just wow. I had no idea that that's where you came from in your childhood, and your ability to see not only these people who treated you this certain way, like I've been learning a lot about inner child work, and anybody that I've been working through, like forgiving, I have been able to shift my lens of like, they're not hurting me because that's who they are, but they have this scared like version of them as a child that is causing them to act in this way. And it sounds like these people, not only did they have inner children that they, that they were scared and maybe were hurt in some way, but it's what goes for generations and generations. And when a belief is that like hammered in, it is very hard for anybody to act in any other way. And your ability to see them for, who they actually were, who wasn't the people that were being mean to you, right? It was practicing that love for the human that they are, rather than their actions that they've been taught. And I think that's just something that we all can practice in every single aspect of our lives. Today I went surfing, and it was so crowded, and this guy like I was paddling out towards a wave, and he almost hit me, or he got off the wave because he almost, like, I was in the way, but like there was nowhere for me to go. And he yelled at me, like, he yelled to himself, but he was like, soon I'm going to just start running people over. And I was like, I'm sorry, dude, like thinking to myself, because I wasn't going to entertain him. Like, that's his issue that he's dealing with. Right. I was just like, he needs a hug or something, like there's so many reasons that people act in certain ways. And a lot of the time we make it mean something about us, when all that it means is that they're working through something, and we don't have to allow it to affect our energy at all. And obviously I'm sure that this took you years to kind of like learn all of this and get to the place that you are. But so many people just live in those stories and allow those things that happened to them when they were young to make them who they are in the current moment, bringing the past to the present in a negative way. Whereas once we start to see people for, the person that we're all beings of infinite love. We were talking about love earlier, and there's so much else that goes on, but in our hearts, in our souls, like that's what we are. This whole planet is that. And all of this like negativity, all of the pain. Obviously, we talked about duality earlier. We have to experience the pain to be able to experience the amazingness. So I don't necessarily believe that like it's sad that we suffer sometimes and feel pain. It's actually very beautiful when you can learn how to process it and then release it and take the lessons and move forward with the lessons rather than cause extra suffering for yourself, which is usually what happens when something happens and then you make up a story about what happens and then you live in that story as if that's reality. And so basically all of us in general, before I started learning all of this, I was like, dang, humans are seriously insane. Like the reality we live in is not reality at all. So that was really cool to just hear how much you learned from that experience and how positive and productive you took it, because a lot of the time if somebody went through that, it would affect their present moment negatively. And your ability to teach now your children and cultivate that kind of experience in their lives where they are learning how to see people for what they really are, see other perspectives. Again, we're so like with the blinders on, my way is the only way, and there's just so much else out there. If we were brought up with my way is the only way, what about this guy who thinks his, like, it's the exact same thing, yet we think our way is the only way. So that was just so beautiful, and thank you so much for sharing that. And you got to celebrate that stuff way more often.
Thank you. I will.
So Shane is not only teaching these beautiful concepts that he's learned along his path to his children, but to all the students he works with at the Onnit Academy, including myself. Shane has been a huge supporter and mentor for me. He's been a big ally in my Hero Project initiative, and I'm always grateful for my conversations with Shane. So thank you, Shane. And let's talk about that. Let's talk about how to be a coach, how to be a mentor. And before into that, it's like who have been mentors and coaches along your way that have taught you your way of being now, and then how do you advise others to be a coach and be a mentor for others and be of service?
That's a great question. It's an interesting one for me because I think over the course of my life, I have had so many teachers, and over the course of my life, I always wanted like the one or two. I wanted my Mr. Miyagi. I wanted to have someone who could like help me through that process. And what's interesting is it's only in my adult life, as I kept looking for that in many ways, that I found that was, at least not yet, because I'm not dead, but that's my mentorship, and the coaching that I've had has come in the form of a mosaic. And so even though I really wanted to have like a person that I could really point to, I have found myself learning so much from so many people. And there are key little specific things that I get from all these people, and that I have gotten so far the gift of the mosaic, the conglomeration of all of these things together to help me see. And it may be coming from, I'm actually only just coming to this right now, this thought process of it may be because if I have continued to go through my life where I'm looking for the commonalities between people, and I'm looking at from different people's perspectives. Oh, this person had this to say. That was interesting. Where are they coming from that it would mean this for them, and what could it mean for me? This person, oh, what could that? And that because that's how I interact with the world, that's how my learning in that way has also come. I'm going to have to reflect on that one a little more. But so I have had people throughout my life that have taught me so much. And just to name a few, there was like the elderly native grandmother that was in her teepee smoking fish that I would go and sit with, my mom and my dad, my Taekwondo instructor when I was in high school, though he did it in such a subtle way you would never think, and yet it had such an impact. I have some high school teachers that really stood out to me in terms of what they gave. And as I continued through in college, and they're not always someone older, oftentimes they're also peers. They're my friends. And I have had coaches from the fitness side specifically, as that has been a route and a path of mine, that I have had some amazing teachers. And of those teachers, some of them are very overtly positive, and some of them get to present me with the challenges that I need to grow. And so through that, all of them have contributed to that. And as I have grown into a role where I get to serve as a coach and as a mentor, I take that like so, I don't even know what the word is. It means so much to me to be able to be of that service for others, and that in their mosaic, I got to contribute in some way to help them. And so being a coach and a mentor, so those are those that continue to be my teachers, was what I was getting at. And my mentors are, I tend not to use this word myself, but students, for lack of a better term. The people who have given me the permission to contribute to their journeys in that role, they continue to be my teachers and my coaches and my mentors, because I continue to learn through the process that we're going through together. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's kind of how I would wrap up who my mentors and teachers throughout my life have been. It's this mosaic. And when I was younger, it was people older than me. As I grew up, it was people of the same age. And as I've gotten older, it is still people younger than me. And all of those still right now. To be a mentor or a coach, if you find yourself being called to that, being called to serve others in that way, a few things that I would say I would put out there. I would plant these seeds for you to start thinking about. One, you have to work on yourself every single day. We spoke earlier about this idea of creating greater awareness and consciousness, or living with greater awareness and consciousness every single day. And that has to be a part of your makeup, whether it feels natural or is something that you have to work at. If you find yourself being called to be a mentor or a coach, that is where it has to start. You have to be in the thick of it with yourself, because as you feel what you go through, you start better being able to see what others are going through. It's a lot harder if you're kind of shut off and you have a rote system, in a sense, to yourself personally. Nope, this is what's right. This is what works. There's nothing wrong with systematization. That's very important. But if you just fall into a habit of a loop where you're just, this is what I present, this is who I am, this is what I do, without some sense of constant awareness and conscientiousness of your own growth through that process, and to allow what you share to grow and evolve with you, then you're like a castle wall. Okay, not a castle wall, a cliff wall. You're like a cliff wall, and all the people coming and flowing in are like the waves, and they're crashing against the wall, and they're not able to get in. Whereas if you open yourself, you can still be the magnificent cliff. You can still be this giant, but if you are conscientious and aware of the ledges you have, well, then the birds can start to lay their nests and their eggs on your ledges. If you are conscientious and aware enough of the holes in your cliff, well, now you have a cave that can accept a wave passing through and sharing this interconnection of the essence of who you are and the essence of who they are together. And in that sharing, there is a connection. And so you have to work on yourself. Be in that process. It isn't just about, sometimes, it is being able to disappear for a while and come back. But outside of that and outside of those opportunities, every day, while you're in the thick of it, just being aware and conscientious and trying to improve by 1 degree. The next thing I would say is then being able to, we've actually been talking about the keys to mentoring and coaching as I see it, this whole conversation. Mm-hmm. This next one is then being able to see where someone else is coming from. Because if you can see where someone else is coming from, you can start to understand why they're in pain. You can understand, or you can start to see why they're struggling. You can start to see what their strengths are. You can start to see what their challenges are. As you start to go from their perspective and really accept it as being right, because it is right for them. It is the reality, Taiha, like you were saying, it is their reality, the reality of their experience. If you can see it from that, then you have an opportunity to be able to communicate more effectively. People tend to think that mentors and coaches are people, or teachers are people that tell you what to do. And in that, many people get into that role thinking, I get to be in this place where I get to tell people what to do and they have to listen to me. And in that, it can seem pretty negative. But we all recognize that maybe they just haven't felt a great sense of value personally in themselves and their lives. And so being in this position is something that helps to elevate themselves in a way where maybe they feel like they can hold on to a little more value, even if it's not, rooted on something solid. But to actually be able to see them allows you to communicate. Being a really strong mentor and coach is the ability to communicate. And when we communicate effectively to others what it is we're trying to contribute, you really have to listen, and you have to be able to see their perspective, take in what it is they're saying, do your best to understand, ask questions. Mm-hmm. Another thing, someone who's in the role of a mentor or a coach or a teacher, well, you're the one who's supposed to have all the questions. So you shouldn't be asking anything. If you ask anything, it makes you seem weak. It makes you seem like you don't know what you're talking about. And yet, to listen and then to ask the questions ensures that you are connecting enough with the person and that you are understanding what they're saying. Because if you ask your questions about what they're sharing and they're like, no, that's not it at all, it doesn't matter what you would have brought. It wouldn't have connected. And then the level of your contribution is that much smaller. And so to be able to listen, ask questions, and then from that place, look at the context. Look at the context of their life. Look at the context, and that's personally on their work, their relationships, any of that. Look at the context of what they're dealing with. Taiha, you were reflecting on that beautifully earlier when you were talking about the understanding, like with your story about surfing, the understanding that's like, oh, his frustration and anger was coming out of him working on something. Like he's just working stuff out inside his head. We have to take that into context when we are in that role with other people. We have to understand the context of where they're coming in, because if we don't, it takes that much longer for them to be in a space where they can receive whatever you have to share. And it takes that much longer for you to find the right delivery mechanism to ensure that whatever you have to share will hit with them effectively. So work on yourself, work to see from other perspectives, listen and ask questions, and then get the picture of the context and deliver appropriately. We have this saying that we talk about in fitness all the time: if all you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail, right? So to be able to have context and adjust and adapt, don't come in with just this one singular thing that you plan on pounding into this person until they get it. Mm-hmm. If you want to be a really effective mentor or coach, have this approach of being able to take in, to receive, to see, to understand more deeply, and then share your unique gift and contribution in context to that individual. And I promise, 100% guaranteed, you will make an impact on that person in a way that you would not any other.
Yes.
Those are my thoughts.
Yes.
Absolutely. We could talk to him forever. Hey, Taha, he has so much nuggets of wisdom, but I'm trying to.
Hold on. I want to respond a little bit to this stuff because it was just so good. I first wanted to say that you are a part of my mosaic now, Shane. I really have appreciated so much of this conversation, and I'm going to remember it for a really long time. You talked about people, coming into your life, your teachers, maybe, the more challenging ones that didn't teach you in a way that somebody would normally, somebody that you look up to as a mentor. But something that I've been really realizing lately is that every single person that comes into my life is a teacher, is an angel for me, negative or positive. Every single interaction that I have, I am learning from it. And that's a choice. I could choose not to learn from it, or choose to write this negative person off as, why did they have to enter my life? But if we choose to see life that way, we can see so much beauty in every single moment, even the ones that are so-called negative. Honestly, negative, positive, another thing that we just make up ourselves. Another thing that you talked about was your credibility of being a coach by constantly working on yourself. Super long story short, I wrestled in high school, and along with others, like self-love issues that I had dealt with, cutting weight, I developed eating disorders, body dysmorphia that I worked through for a long time. And I'm currently in a life coaching certification course where I'm learning how to coach people through these types of issues. And the whole first part of the course was about diving into myself, because if I didn't discover for myself where my issues were rooted in, what caused me to be this way, there was no way that I was going to be able to help anybody else. I had to do the work myself, not only to feel confident in myself, but for other people to feel confident that they could trust me, because I had been, obviously everybody's experience is different, but I had been in similar places as them. And so constantly working on seeing those shadows that I still have allows me to help others see their shadows, and another thing, and improve them. Another thing you said was how it was a big circle of, now as you're older, you're learning from your students too. And that's something that I'm recognizing so much too, is when I'm coaching people, it's a co-nourishing relationship, right? There's a difference between codependent, where the person is like dependent on the coach to do all the work for them, and that's just not going to result in transformation at all, right? It's a co-nourishing relationship where I've been learning how to not tell them, even though I want to tell the client, like, you should do this, or like, this is the story, like blah, blah, blah. When you ask the questions and have them discover it for themselves and answer, oh, wow, yeah, I don't actually believe that to be true. Or yeah, like I was totally making that up, or something. Like, as we ask more questions, we allow them to know how much we're listening, and allow them to know that they are being empowered and have the power to make these discoveries themselves, rather than having somebody just telling them everything and then it not being received in a way that it would be had, you know, if they're discovering it themselves. So that's just something huge that I never realized. Like, some of my conversations would go a certain way and I'd be like, oh, yep, I should it all over them again. Like, dang. So it's hard because you know, a lot of the time you can see the answer, but the work lies within crafting your response to them in a way that allows them to be empowered and them to discover it all for themselves, so that they can feel the power that they have within them.
Yeah, because it's that process, right? It's,
yeah.
And if depending on how we go about doing that, we potentially take away from their ability to be, as Derek was saying, in process, on the journey. Right. I love that, co-nourishing. So that's a great term. That's great.
Yeah.
So the number one thing that holds people back in this process is fear. People find themselves at the crossroad of the shoulds that your parents have told you, society, and then the must that you feel in your heart, that call to action. How do you overcome that fear and step into your must, go all in for your dreams rather than play it safe and go down should avenue like many do?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that was one that you'd asked me before, and I've really been thinking about it. And there was the direction that I came in from initially was trust, and trust in the process, trust in, that there's a greater plan, trust that you have it within you to be able to achieve what it is that you're going to do. And when you have that trust, fear starts to disappear, or at least your ability to face the fear and move through it increases. But then I was thinking about that a little bit more, and I was thinking that can be a difficult one for a lot of us, like a lot of people. Trust in what? We all have different perspectives around a greater power and what that means. So trust in that doesn't necessarily always resonate with some people. And yet every single person has the capacity to express infinitely higher than any of us are right now. Any of us. So just because you don't necessarily have trust in that doesn't mean that, you can't keep striving for something greater. So I was like, okay, so that may not work. Trust in oneself. Trust that you have everything within you. No problem. I have all I have within. I may not be doing it great right now, but I have everything that I need inside me to get better. Well, there are a lot of us in a state, sometimes at different times of our lives, sometimes for our whole life, where we don't have that trust. We don't actually have that belief in ourselves. And part of that could be because of our environment, our different experiences, not yet having had the opportunity to galvanize or to alchemize. If we were to think about alchemy, it's this idea that we've got all these experiences that feel heavy, that feel negative as we're going through, and we're still on the path of finding the alchemical element that will help us turn it into gold. It's not about leaving all of that. It's about recognizing what it is and that it's part of creating the gold. And maybe we haven't gotten that yet. And so trust or belief in ourselves can be a tough one. It can be like, yeah, but I do not feel that at all. And so trust in others. Trust that everybody, every human being is inherently good. The majority of us are inherently good. And that we can trust in each other and start to open ourselves up to taking in their perspectives and their thoughts to help feed into the whole picture. Some of our experiences don't lend themselves to easily doing that. So I was like, okay, so trust is a hard one. Trust would be a hard one to just tell everybody, no, you want to get past fear, just trust. I think to be able to face fear in your struggles is rather the word I was looking for is acceptance. And this one isn't like all flowers and rainbows, and it won't feel like it. But acceptance that every single thing that we face in this life has been put before us, or we have experienced, as a means to grow, as a means to develop, as a means to evolve. If we think about metal, and you think about, this was actually an analogy that my mom had shared with me when I was younger, and it made such a difference to me. She said, if you take, and it was sharing an analogy that a gentleman by the name of Abdul Baha, who was a significant figure in our faith, just used this simple analogy, but what a difference it made. He said, if you take a piece of rusted metal, then that rust can continue to weaken it. That rust can cause dust. If you cut yourself on it, you can get diseases and infections. There's all this negative stuff around the rust. So the only way to really, get rid of that rust is you have to rub it off. You have to sand it, because before the rust fully eats away and breaks away the metal, there's still a hard core in there. So if we see rust, you then start to take the sandpaper and you start to rub it, or any kind of, friction. And if you take this friction and you continue to apply harder and harder friction, what does that feel like? It's hot. If you do that with your hand right now, it gets hot and it gets uncomfortable, and it can be the chipping away of that rust can be peeling of big uncomfortable shadows, that have been a part of our life for such a long time. It doesn't always feel good. And yet, if you continue to do that, then what you bring through is the shining metal within. You continue to leave it in a state of strength. And so to overcome fear, and any fear, I would say, is if you have a difficult time trusting right now, maybe that comes down the path, or in those moments where we find ourselves struggling with that trust, let the trust go and connect to acceptance. And the acceptance that whatever you are facing is something that is being contributed to rubbing the rust off so the shine of you can come through. And if you can do that, then no matter what fears come up, because this idea of fear is that we are somehow, like at the core of fear is that we're going to die, that we will become nothing. If I go and do this, I don't want to do that because I could not exist, whether in actuality or just not exist in our day-to-day life. I don't want to step outside of this because it may rock my boat. And if it rocks my current reality, I don't know what lives outside of that. And I could cease to exist. At least this is comfortable. At least this I know. And so any challenge that you face, oh man, that could be really uncomfortable. That could rock my world so much that my life will not look the same. And the fear that I feel around that, just accept that whatever that reality becomes, it's going to help the shine come through and help the strength be present and come to the surface. So I would say acceptance of those things, those challenges in our lives, help us move through fear and be able to recognize the fear, be able to work with the fear. It's not about being fearless. It's about having less resistance to moving through the fear.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I'm going to use that rust analogy so much. We talk about like peeling the layers of an onion off, but I love that because, you know, all this outside stuff that we have become from our shadows and everything, it's a lot of the time it's dirty. It's not like nice to look at. It's not who we really are. And who we really are is that shining, beautiful, strong person. So I love that. I'm going to use that for sure.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And the intensity of the heat. And I think, and it's so easy to sometimes fall into a place of, oh, well, it's really hard, or that I'm supposed to somehow move through this with absolute, like the kind of grace where nothing bothers me at all. It's like, no, it's going to be messy sometimes, and we're going to feel inadequate sometimes. And I have these annual themes. This is a whole other conversation, but for now, I have these annual themes that come to me every year. It started as a very active process, but the annual theme that came to me for this year was is empty the bucket. And it was so interesting for me to think about empty the bucket, because in the past, I've connected to things that were more about letting go. And this is to your point, Taiha, what you were just talking about, this idea of like, no, let me just let it go. Let me just be detached. Let it, I was like, no, empty the bucket is what keeps coming to mind. And what does it mean to empty the bucket? Emptying the bucket is not the letting go part. I'm gonna get to that part. I'm working on it. Ask me again when I'm 90. But empty the bucket is active. Empty the bucket is take it and dump. Take it and dump. Take it and dump, whatever it is. And as it dumps and as you empty the bucket, whatever other stuff comes up, and you're like, oh man, do I need that in my life right now? Dump. And so that really aligns, I think, and connects with that idea of like, yeah, sometimes, yes, it is absolutely surrender and being able to do it with grace and letting go. And sometimes it's just really active in the things that we face. There's heat as we're working through that. But what comes out of it is beautiful, whether it's the bucket that is now has space to be filled with all of the better, or that shiny piece of metal with absolute strength to be able to be more a representation of who you really are.
Beautiful.
Taiha, your closing question for Shane.
All right. So I got one question for you. And some people like to do a phrase, but I say in 3 words, how would you describe the experience you are having on this earth?
Dang. They didn't give this to me ahead of time. I couldn't think about it. But you know what? It's funny. I'm going to use this because when it ended up being the core of my business before I came to Onnit, and it wasn't immediately on the forefront, but it was my anchor through the whole time that I did it. I was in the desert. I was taking the opportunity of some time to myself to find what my thing was that I was connecting to that drove why I would be doing this business. And those 3 words are dare to evolve. Each and every day, it is active. Dare to evolve. I would say that has been my constant process, and probably the 3 words that I would express how I strive to live my life.
I love that so much. You'll hear dare to dream, dare to do these things, but an evolution kind of seems like just something that kind of happens. But for us to continuously be working on ourselves, improving ourselves, raising our consciousness, awakening those around us to do the same thing, that's so active and takes work every single day to be practicing that awareness, practicing that improvement every day. So I love that.
Awesome. Thank you for asking.
You mentioned 90-year-old Shane Heins. Who is that 90-year-old Shane Heins? What is the legacy he has left behind? What is the impact he has left on this planet?
Oh, Derek. That's a good question. I don't want to feel like it's a cop-out by saying I don't know. But that's something that I go back and forth about. You know, I think it is something incredibly powerful, and it's an incredibly powerful practice to have a vision at the end of your life, to be able to look back and go, if I was at, you know, looking down into my grave and about to step in, and I get to look back at my life and go, what would I have wanted to have left in the process? In many ways, for me, that feels too small, because I don't actually know. All I know is that we have the capacity to be infinitely more than any of us have ever been to date. That's what I know. And I believe in the very core of my soul. What that looks like, though, is beyond me. I have no idea. I have images and thoughts and, you know, perhaps. And then I strive for those things that seem intangible and out of reach. And I want that to be left open, so that by the time I get to, you know, 90 or the end of my life, that gets to be one of the final gifts that I get to see, is just, so how'd I do? Like, how far was I able to take that? And in that moment, there will be the gift of recognizing what that was. And in that moment, having the gift of knowing that it's just scratching the surface for every other generation to come. That it is so infinitely more than that. And that, when I think about that, that brings me absolute joy. And so I have this saying that is like a theme for me, not my annual theme, but this saying that I think about as I move through my life, and that is, take the journey, unveil the path. So I am doing my best to take the journey. And if we get to be together near the end of my life in this plane, or we get to connect in the life of the next, then we'll get to see together maybe just what that unveiled to be.
Beautiful. And as that 90-year-old Shane Heins prepares to take that last step into his grave, he has the opportunity to send a message to the current Shane Heins 50 years in the past with his final exhale. What does he tell you?
Say it and dance. Say it and dance like you've never imagined you possibly could.
So beautiful. Well, I look forward to the next time all three of us are dancing in person. We had a beautiful dance here today. I'm so thankful for your time, Shane. We could have gone on so much longer. And that's just incentive to have you back on in the future for our audience. And then also in person, us three. I know we will manifest that at some point down the road.
Absolutely.
Where can they find you? On Instagram at Shane Heins, at the Onnit Academy. I couldn't recommend those trainings enough. Where else can they find you, Shane?
So yes, I am at Onnit, and we have had the opportunity to offer education over these last 5 or 6 years, and something that I'm really proud of, and I think has contributed in a really meaningful way. As we are in interesting times right now, the ability to have that experience has changed a little bit for the moment. And so we're working on other opportunities to have, future live events, but also have a degree of connection online as well as we move forward. So I definitely would say keep an eye out for upcoming announcements and opportunities through onnit.com, as that's where I am right now, and blessed to be a part of that team. In terms of seeing more of me, I'm going to say, I usually say this abashedly, but I'm going to say it. My name, Shane Heins, ShaneHeins, at Shane Heins on Instagram. And as Derek knows, I am not the most prolific social media individual, but as energy comes flowing through to be able to put input through that channel more, that is where you would find me. And if you want to reach out, I'm trying to get better, not trying. I'm working on getting better at connecting through DMs and whatnot. In some ways, the social media thing, it's like I know it, but when I say it and I'm not always on there, that's when I start sounding like an old man.
You're doing great. And Shane, thank you so much for joining my mosaic. I am so grateful to have had this conversation and for hopefully many future conversations. Derek, thank you so much for introducing us and introducing our guests to Shane. You're such a beautiful soul, and I learned so much, and I'm super excited to see everything else that you create for this world. We have no idea what's possible. I am so here for it. I'm so stoked to see what happens in the future.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Let's bring it in. Fist bump.
Oh, there we go.
Welcome to the winner circle. This is a choice everyone has to step on in, answer that call. We'll be there. We're inviting you in to join us. Thank you, Shane.
Thank you.
And we're going to sign
so much, guys.
off here.